So, Prince William and Princess Catherine have officially broken their silence. And the reason Camilla was reportedly forced out of Windsor Lodge is far more explosive than anyone could have imagined. At the heart of the story, according to the reports, isn't simply another royal family dispute over who is entitled to which residence. The allegation is that Camilla personally took control of the historic villa, dismissed loyal employees who had served there for decades, and then callously dumped priceless mementos belonging to the late Queen and Princess Diana into a cold, damp basement. And incredibly, that's only where this story begins. The real bombshell allegedly came when William assembled what was described as undeniable evidence that Camilla had diverted millions of pounds in royal funds to pay for these extravagant gold-plated renovations, supposedly in an effort to wipe away every visible reminder of the women who occupied the residence before her. And that's where the entire situation becomes truly bizarre, because if your goal is to strengthen your future position as queen, deliberately destroying the memory of some of the most adored figures in modern royal history seems like an incredibly reckless strategy. Before we dive into the chaotic details of how this reportedly unfolded, do me a quick favor and hit that subscribe button for Crown Watch. It genuinely helps us continue bringing you these royal breakdowns. Alright, let's get into it. Tucked away behind the ancient oak trees of Windsor Great Park, Windsor Lodge has long represented comfort, privacy, and peace for the House of Windsor. It was where the late Queen Elizabeth enjoyed quiet weekend escapes, and it reportedly held some of the most personal mementos connected to the late Princess Diana. So, when it comes to this particular residence, the emotional significance is extraordinarily high. Now, according to the story, on this particularly gloomy afternoon, Catherine steps out of the family car and finds herself standing directly before the estate's magnificent iron gates. But almost immediately, she realizes that something is seriously wrong. The gates, which had apparently remained open for years, are suddenly secured by thick, heavy gray chains wrapped around them with an enormous steel padlock. And honestly, that single detail feels incredibly aggressive. You don't simply place a giant padlock on a royal residence without appearing to send a very deliberate message. But things become even more troubling. Positioned on both sides of the entrance aren't the familiar royal guards dressed in their traditional red uniforms. Instead, there are 4 imposing strangers wearing completely black uniforms. These men are allegedly private security officers personally brought in by Queen Camilla through an outside security company operating completely beyond the palace's normal security structure. When they recognize Catherine, they don't respond with the polite bow that royal protocol would normally require. Instead, they physically block her path with hard, expressionless faces, their hands resting near their tactical belts, staring at the Princess of Wales with an attitude reportedly described as suspicious and hostile, almost as though she's an unwanted stranger attempting to breach a military installation. And if that account is accurate, then the situation creates a huge question about the chain of command. Catherine is supposed to be the future queen. Having privately contracted guards treat her as though she's a potential threat inside royal property would represent a stunning breakdown in the palace hierarchy. Then Catherine notices Mary, the elderly maid who spent more than 30 years serving the late queen, standing outside the gates and trembling in a lightweight cardigan. In her hands is a small cardboard box containing the few belongings she was apparently allowed to take. Standing beside her is Arthur, the elderly gardener who had cared for the white roses famously associated with Princess Diana. Both of their faces are marked by obvious humiliation and distress. Catherine immediately rushes toward them, and Mary, struggling through tears, explains that Camilla had allegedly ordered an abrupt overnight dismissal of every loyal employee connected to the previous generation. The explanation reportedly given was that Camilla wanted to purge Windsor Lodge of the intrusive presence of the past and turn the property into a completely controlled fortress where she could operate without anyone from the old household watching her. And honestly, I don't understand the supposed logic behind firing a gardener whose job was to maintain Diana's roses unless the actual objective was to erase that connection entirely. That's not simply a security decision. That's something deeply personal. So Catherine, fueled by completely understandable anger, turns around and walks directly toward the iron gates. With the natural authority expected from a princess, she orders the private guards to open the entrance immediately. The men dressed in black exchange uncomfortable looks. And, faced with Catherine's unmistakable determination, their leader eventually has no choice but to produce the key and remove the chains. Catherine steps into the main hall and immediately feels overwhelmed by what has apparently happened to the residence's historic character. Camilla had seemingly treated the estate as though it were her own personal possession, pouring extraordinary amounts of royal money into renovations that were described as completely excessive. The centuries-old oak paneling featuring delicate hand-drawn sketches of past princes has allegedly been coated in a cheap, glaring layer of gold-plated paint. The exquisitely woven silk carpets have supposedly been removed and replaced with loud, bright red rugs. The entire room has effectively been transformed into what is being portrayed as a tasteless monument to extravagant wealth. And when you compare the explanation with what allegedly took place, the argument that these changes were simply necessary modernization becomes difficult to accept. Painting historic oak with gold isn't conservation. It's destruction. But the most disturbing discovery is still ahead. Catherine moves from room to room and realizes that there is absolutely no visible sign of the priceless heirlooms associated with the late Queen and Princess Diana. The famous oil portrait of a young Diana, captured with her radiant smile and traditionally displayed in the main living room, is nowhere to be found. The late Queen's rosewood vanity table has also disappeared. Catherine's heart begins racing as she follows a dark corridor toward the damp underground storage rooms located behind the kitchen. Then, beneath the weak glow of her phone flashlight, she suddenly stops. In one dark, damp corner covered with layers of dust and hanging cobwebs, the family's treasured history has apparently been thrown across the floor as though it were worthless junk. The late Queen's silver picture frame bearing the royal crest is dented and partially buried underneath damaged handwritten diaries. But what shocks Catherine most is Princess Diana's portrait, which Camilla had allegedly ordered removed, now lying abandoned on the wet stone floor. The glass covering the photograph has been fractured by a long crack and is covered in grime from the basement. Camilla had allegedly banished these deeply meaningful memories into the darkness, seemingly determined to erase every remaining reminder of the women who came before her. Catherine drops to her knees on the freezing stone floor, her hands shaking as she carefully lifts Diana's portrait. With the edge of her coat, she gently brushes away the dirt covering the face of her late mother-in-law. The sadness inside her quickly mixes with an overwhelming sense of anger. She realizes that remaining silent is no longer an option. Holding the damaged portrait tightly against herself, she walks back up the stairs with determined steps. She ignores every expectation of royal courtesy and pushes open the enormous double doors leading into the royal tea room on the second floor without bothering to knock. This is reportedly the very room where Camilla had recently covered the ceiling in gold leaf, causing it to shimmer beneath imported Italian crystal chandeliers. Inside, Queen Camilla is reportedly relaxing in a red velvet armchair embroidered with a large golden crown, casually drinking Earl Grey tea from an expensive gilded bone china cup. Around her stand 3 newly appointed maids, bowing repeatedly while presenting an assortment of pastries. When Catherine suddenly enters with the damaged portrait of Diana held firmly in her hands, Camilla doesn't appear shocked or embarrassed. Instead, she calmly places her teacup onto its saucer, raises one thin eyebrow, and gives Catherine a small, smug, dismissive smile. Catherine doesn't waste time on meaningless formalities. She walks directly across the room and places Diana's portrait forcefully onto the marble table in front of Camilla. In a controlled but unmistakably sharp voice, she demands that Camilla explain the cruel and completely unjustified dismissal of Mary and Arthur, along with the apparent destruction of the family's legacy by throwing priceless keepsakes into a damp basement. Catherine makes it clear that she would prefer to settle the matter privately inside the family rather than allow the situation to explode into a massive public scandal. But instead of responding to that final attempt at restraint, Camilla allegedly reveals an even colder side of herself. She slowly rises from her chair, adjusts the heavy pearl necklace around her neck, and takes several deliberate steps toward Catherine. Her expression is filled with unmistakable resentment and cold jealousy. Camilla then bluntly announces that Windsor Lodge is now her private residence, supposedly granted to her by the king with direct authority over its management. She insists that this gives her the freedom to do whatever she wants with the property. That includes removing what she considers outdated memorabilia and disposing of anything she personally believes carries bad luck. Looking directly at Diana's photograph, Camilla allegedly sneers that Diana died decades ago and that those dusty old pictures belong in the basement so that the rooms can instead display her own collection of modern artwork. But there's a major problem with that argument. If the king had granted Camilla authority to manage the residence, that authority would not ordinarily mean she could simply destroy, discard, or permanently dispose of historic royal artifacts, many of which could fall under the protection of the royal collection. You can't simply throw away a royal portrait because you personally consider it unlucky. Camilla's alleged arrogance has now crossed every conceivable boundary. Rather than taking Catherine's warning seriously, she openly challenges the young princess's position, insisting that Catherine has absolutely no authority to lecture a reigning queen about how royal property should be managed. To make it absolutely clear that she considered herself in complete control, Camilla turns toward the doorway and gives a sharp signal to the 2 private guards dressed in black waiting outside. The 2 heavily built men step into the room without showing the slightest respect for the Princess of Wales's position. They seize Catherine by both arms and roughly pull her across the cold stone-paved corridor. Catherine struggles against them, but the guards are considerably stronger. They forcefully push her through the enormous iron gates, causing her to stumble and nearly collapse onto the gravel outside. The brutal shove leaves deep bruises around Catherine's wrists, angry red and purple marks that pulse painfully beneath her skin. The enormous iron gates are slammed shut directly in her face while Camilla watches from the second-floor balcony with a satisfied, almost smug expression. The queen believes that by having Catherine physically removed, she has secured an unquestionable victory. But what she doesn't realize is that the bruises now visible around Catherine's wrists will eventually become the final blow against her own public image. Inside his private study at Adelaide Cottage, Prince William stands completely still beside the window. The quiet click of the door opening breaks through the heavy silence. Catherine enters slowly, carefully pulling up the sleeve of her sweater as she applies ointment to her injured wrist. Beneath the warm glow of the desk lamp, the deep red and purple bruises, clearly shaped by the pressure of the private guard's fingers, stand out painfully against her pale skin. William turns around and immediately notices the injury on his wife's hand. His expression changes instantly, his deep blue eyes narrowing with controlled anger. He crosses the room and takes Catherine's hand, gently but firmly. His fingers tremble slightly when they make contact with the bruised skin. In a voice that is emotional but remarkably controlled, Catherine tells him everything that happened. She describes the sudden dismissal of the longtime staff, the discovery of Diana's portrait abandoned in the basement, and finally the shocking arrogance of having private guards physically remove her from the property like an ordinary trespasser. The fury building inside William isn't a screaming explosion. Instead, it is a silent, terrifying blue flame. Camilla has crossed a boundary that cannot simply be ignored. She hasn't merely disrespected the memory of his late mother or violated the sacred legacy of the late queen. She has now gone so far as to authorize physical force against his wife. William looks directly into Catherine's eyes, and when he speaks, his voice becomes low, cold, and heavy with absolute determination. He tells her that he will never allow anyone, not even the queen herself, to exceed their authority or misuse royal property while humiliating and dishonoring his family. But William is also a man who understands strategy. He knows Camilla is politically calculating and understands precisely how to shelter herself behind the enormous influence attached to her title. If William simply makes accusations or allows the issue to become another loud family confrontation, Camilla could easily portray herself in the media as the helpless victim of an aggressive stepson. What he needs is undeniable evidence strong enough to permanently strip Camilla of her practical control. That very night, without waiting for another family meeting or becoming trapped in lengthy administrative procedures, William personally orders a highly confidential investigation to begin. He reaches out directly to a group of trusted financial auditors who had allegedly been pushed aside by Camilla after she gained influence, along with an independent team of private investigators operating entirely outside the palace's existing security structure. A temporary investigation headquarters is established at a secluded location deep inside a private woodland property controlled by William. The instructions are simple, precise, and strictly confidential. Conduct a complete forensic audit of every financial operation, expense, payment, and transaction connected to the Windsor Lodge renovations during the previous 2 years. Under William's direct supervision, the financial specialists begin examining every transaction, regardless of how insignificant it initially appears. They follow the movement of money allegedly taken from the Royal Heritage Conservation Fund, a fund specifically designated for maintaining and protecting the historic buildings belonging to royal estates. At the same time, private investigators quietly track activity around Windsor Lodge, approaching the contractors and luxury interior suppliers selected by Camilla in an effort to collect information from people directly involved in the renovations. Queen Camilla continues living comfortably inside her newly transformed gilded residence, completely convinced that her authority is secure and beyond challenge. What she doesn't know is that directly beneath her apparent control, William and Catherine have begun constructing an invisible net that becomes tighter with every passing day. With each day that goes by, the information recovered through William's confidential audit becomes more extensive, gradually creating a disturbing picture of alleged abuse of authority and relentless financial excess. Financial records and anonymous invoices delivered to the hidden investigation headquarters reveal a reality far more serious than William's original concerns. Catherine sits directly in front of the computer monitors with the financial specialists, carefully reviewing the growing collection of digital records. What they uncover appears to point toward a specific and deeply unethical scheme. Camilla has allegedly redirected an enormous amount of royal money away from the family's shared heritage conservation fund. Millions of pounds that were supposedly intended to repair moss-covered roof tiles, stabilize weakened foundations, and preserve the historic structure of Windsor Lodge have allegedly been diverted without authorization. Instead, Camilla channels the money into accounts belonging to favored contractors to finance extravagant renovations designed around her personal tastes and demands. The records allegedly show that Camilla authorized the installation of enormous solid marble bathtubs imported directly from Italy, the construction of a gigantic walk-in wardrobe equipped with a gold leaf underfloor heating system, and the complete replacement of the property's lighting fixtures with extremely expensive crystal chandeliers. According to the documents, these alterations damaged the historic character of the residence and were carried out without proper authorization, allegedly violating the strict conditions governing occupancy and renovation at Windsor Lodge. But Camilla's alleged misuse of the property doesn't stop there. William discovers another disturbing development. She has reportedly transformed Windsor Lodge into something resembling a private luxury resort for members of her own non-royal family. Surveillance recordings collected by the private investigators allegedly show Camilla's children and grandchildren repeatedly staying at the residence for long periods, moving freely through restricted sections and receiving access to expensive royal household services without the required authorization. At the same time, William and Catherine, who are portrayed as the rightful future heirs of the dynasty, are being aggressively prevented from accessing the property by Camilla's privately hired security guards. But the most important discovery of all comes next. The audit uncovers a highly significant financial ledger, allegedly documenting a secret arrangement between Camilla and a major construction contractor. The ledger reportedly records substantial kickback payments being transferred into the personal account of Camilla's brother after the contractor received inflated, multi-million-pound renovation agreements connected to Windsor Lodge. This, according to the investigation, is the ironclad evidence William had been searching for, proof that could establish a serious case of embezzlement involving royal assets by the reigning queen. Every piece of material, including original invoices, bank transfer records, payment confirmations, and surveillance footage, is gathered by William and Catherine and assembled inside a thick black leather-bound dossier. Each page is marked with bright red identification labels, creating what appears to be a complete case file capable of bringing Camilla's alleged abuse of power to an end. William places one firm hand on the black leather dossier. His eyes burn with determined resolve. He looks across at Catherine and gives a small, deliberate nod. The evidence is ready. Brilliant light pours down from the enormous crystal chandeliers hanging inside Windsor Lodge's grand banquet hall, reflecting across the glittering gold leaf walls that Queen Camilla has recently finished decorating. The enormous room is filled with animated conversation, the soft clatter of silverware against delicate bone china plates, and the rich aromas of elaborate dishes prepared by elite private chefs. Camilla sits proudly at the head of the long antique oak dining table, dressed in a magnificent red velvet gown with a thick, polished pearl necklace resting around her neck. She enjoys the admiration of aristocratic guests and trusted allies whom she has invited to celebrate what she considers the successful transformation of the estate. In her mind, she is now the unquestioned ruler of Windsor Lodge. The loyal employees who served the late queen have been removed, the treasured relics of the past have been hidden away in the dark cellar, and the residence has been transformed into a monument celebrating her own dominance. Camilla lifts her glass of red wine, smiling broadly as one of the guests praises her supposedly impeccable taste in interior design and renovation. Complete self-satisfaction appears across her face, the confidence of someone who believes she has finally claimed something she spent years longing to possess. But her celebration doesn't last. The massive wooden doors of the banquet hall suddenly swing open from the outside without a formal announcement from the household staff. Prince William and Princess Catherine walk into the room. The unexpected arrival of the Prince and Princess of Wales hits the banquet like an icy wind, sweeping instantly through the warm atmosphere and bringing every conversation to a complete stop. The aristocratic guests exchange confused glances, suddenly sensing an enormous invisible pressure settle over the room. William walks in front, his expression as cold as carved ice, his deep blue eyes fixed directly on Camilla. Catherine moves beside her husband, her elegant gown gliding quietly over the polished floor. Her calm, regal presence completely overwhelms the gaudy spectacle surrounding the reigning queen. Behind them come not unfamiliar faces, but loyal royal guards personally selected by William. And moments before entering the banquet hall, this security unit had quietly disarmed, restrained, and escorted Camilla's entire privately hired security team dressed in black away from Windsor Lodge without creating a public disturbance. Now the crown's most trusted soldiers are stationed at every entrance, transforming Camilla's grand banquet hall into an impenetrable steel cage with nowhere left to run. Camilla gasps as the smile instantly disappears from her face. The wine glass trembling between her fingers releases several dark red drops onto the flawless white tablecloth, looking almost like spots of blood. But consistent with her calculating personality, Camilla quickly regains control of herself. She forcefully places the wine glass onto the table and rises from her chair, her arrogant voice cutting sharply through the stunned silence as she demands to know why William and Catherine have dared to invade her private celebration without receiving her permission. William doesn't answer. He continues forward with calm, deliberate steps until he reaches the head of the table, stopping directly across from Camilla. Only a polished wooden table separates the two of them. Yet symbolically, that narrow space has become the dividing line between two sides of an irreversible royal conflict. William takes the thick black leather dossier from Catherine and drops it heavily onto the table directly in front of Camilla. The file falls open, exposing page after page of financial records documenting allegedly diverted royal funds, suspicious invoices, and detailed evidence of violations concerning the residence. William fixes his eyes on Camilla, his voice deep, controlled, and powerful enough to echo through the frozen banquet hall. He gives her a final ultimatum. Camilla must sign the document surrendering every management right connected to Windsor Lodge and leave the property immediately. If she refuses, the entire contents of the dossier, including the evidence allegedly proving her cooperation with contractors to divert and misuse the family's shared wealth, will be presented to the royal family and made public that very night. Camilla's confidence collapses almost instantly. She stares at the highlighted financial figures and the signatures allegedly provided by contractors describing their involvement. The heavily made-up face of the queen slowly loses its color. Her lips begin to tremble, and for several seconds she is completely unable to speak as the devastating evidence sits openly before the very people she had invited to celebrate her supposed triumph. The atmosphere inside the banquet hall becomes almost unbearable. It is so tense that everyone can hear Camilla's shallow, hurried breathing. The aristocratic guests who only moments earlier were happily raising their glasses in honor of the reigning queen now lower their eyes, desperately avoiding direct contact with William or Catherine. They understand immediately that Camilla's influence has collapsed and that publicly standing beside her now could amount to complete social self-destruction. But Camilla has never been someone who surrenders quietly. With her back against the wall, her deceptive instincts suddenly return with explosive force. She points a trembling finger toward William, her voice breaking between anger and fear as she accuses him of orchestrating a deliberate campaign to destroy her reputation. She claims that every document inside the dossier is nothing more than fabricated material designed to humiliate the queen and attack the honor of the crown. She then turns toward the surrounding guests, desperately searching the room for someone willing to defend her. But all she receives is an overwhelming silence. Nobody moves. Nobody speaks. Not one person dares to step forward. Then, almost as if she has suddenly recovered her confidence, Camilla straightens herself and puts on a familiar expression of false superiority. With a sneer, she signals toward a trusted attendant standing quietly in the corner. The servant immediately hurries over and hands her a tablet. Camilla raises the screen for everyone in the room to see, revealing what appears to be a carefully manipulated surveillance recording. The footage shows a woman who looks remarkably similar to Catherine secretly unlocking the underground archive rooms at Windsor Lodge and removing valuable royal artifacts. Camilla suddenly looks triumphant. She announces that Catherine herself is the thief, claiming that the Princess of Wales secretly entered the vault to steal jewelry and priceless family keepsakes before attempting to frame Camilla for the crime. Whispers immediately spread throughout the banquet hall. Several of Camilla's remaining supporters begin quietly muttering among themselves. Camilla turns toward Catherine with a challenging expression, convinced that she has successfully reversed the entire situation with one dramatic revelation. But Catherine isn't frightened. She isn't even visibly unsettled. Instead, she gives a small, almost gentle smile, her calm expression revealing nothing but complete contempt for Camilla's increasingly desperate performance. Rather than wasting time arguing, Catherine reaches into her pocket, pulls out her personal phone, and presses a single button connected to the banquet hall's media system. Instantly, the enormous display screen normally used to showcase royal artwork comes alive. A high-definition video begins playing. The sound is perfectly clear. There are no obvious cuts, no editing, no manipulation. This is the original recording captured by a hidden camera that William's investigative team had secretly recovered from Camilla's own internal security network before she could erase the evidence. Every person inside the dining hall falls completely silent. All eyes turn toward the massive screen. And then Camilla's face appears. Her sharp features are unmistakable. Her distinctive raspy voice is equally impossible to deny. On the recording, Camilla is standing inside her private quarters, aggressively issuing instructions to the captain of her private security team. Doctor, the surveillance footage of Catherine's visit this afternoon. Make it appear that she's stealing the family keepsakes, and release it online if she says anything about my spending at Windsor Lodge. And make absolutely certain that the original invoices from the contractor are destroyed. The room becomes even more silent. But the recording doesn't end there. The footage cuts to another scene showing Camilla meeting privately with the contractor and allegedly discussing a scheme to inflate the costs of repairs to the roof and heating system by 3 times their actual value. The excess money is then allegedly redirected from the family's shared funds into her brother's personal account, supposedly to help settle his gambling debts. Camilla's recorded voice continues playing clearly, sentence after sentence, destroying whatever remaining possibility of denial she had. The carefully constructed image of the compassionate and respectable queen completely collapses. In its place is an image of someone portrayed as greedy, selfish, and deliberately deceptive, willing to disrespect the dead and allegedly divert family resources for personal benefit. Camilla remains frozen in place. Her eyes widen in horror as she stares at the screen. Her mouth opens slightly, but no words come out. The humiliation taking place directly in front of her closest allies is devastating because it strikes at the very center of her pride. One by one, the guests begin quietly rising from their seats. Nobody offers Camilla a goodbye. Instead, they respectfully bow toward William and Catherine before quickly making their way out of the banquet hall as though they were escaping a dangerous battlefield. Within only a few minutes, the magnificent room is almost completely deserted. Only 3 people remain: William, Catherine, and Camilla. The woman who had entered the evening believing herself to be untouchable now stands trembling in the middle of the wreckage created by her own alleged lies, completely isolated and powerless as the consequences of her actions finally catch up with her. William looks down at his wristwatch. Then he raises his eyes and gives Camilla a freezing, unforgiving stare. He informs her that she has exactly 2 hours to gather her personal belongings and leave Windsor Lodge. From this moment forward, the management of the entire estate is to be transferred to the Prince and Princess of Wales under the supreme authority of the family. Every privilege Camilla previously enjoyed at the residence is revoked immediately. Camilla sees the complete absence of mercy in William's expression. She finally understands that she has lost everything. There is nowhere left to hide. No allies remain. No escape route is available. And so she is forced to accept the humiliation she had spent the entire evening trying to avoid. She attempts to plead with William, appealing to their family relationship and reminding him of the dignity and honor supposedly owed to the crown. But William simply turns away. He refuses to look at the woman he believes has inflicted so much suffering on his family. Under the firm and emotionless supervision of the royal guards personally assigned by William, Camilla is forced to gather her jewelry, clothing, and other belongings herself. There are no luxury designer suitcases waiting for her. There are no loyal maids carefully folding and organizing her wardrobe. Instead, her possessions are hurriedly thrown into ordinary cardboard boxes, exactly the same kind of crude boxes she had allegedly used when discarding Diana's precious keepsakes into the dark basement. It becomes a striking and almost poetic form of retribution for the cruelty she had allegedly shown toward the family's memories. The transfer of Windsor Lodge takes place in complete and uncomfortable silence. Camilla drags her suitcase across the main hall, her once glamorous red velvet gown now trailing across the dusty stone path. As she finally steps beyond the gates into the freezing drizzle of the Windsor night, she is confronted by the familiar faces of former household employees, including Mary and Arthur, who have already been reinstated by William and Catherine. There are no luxury limousines waiting to collect her. Instead, Camilla is forced to enter a simple black security SUV and leave the estate under circumstances she never imagined possible. Queen Camilla's control over Windsor Lodge is officially finished tonight. As the vehicle carrying her disappears around the distant bend, the heavy iron gates of Windsor Lodge close once again. But this time, they close for a different purpose. To protect the residence's peace, history, and dignity, William and Catherine turn back toward the house. They waste no time. Together with their loyal guards, they immediately make their way down into the dark cellar to recover the priceless keepsakes associated with the late Queen Elizabeth and Princess Diana. Catherine personally takes a soft silk cloth and carefully begins removing every remaining layer of dust from Diana's portrait and the late Queen's silver frame. With the deepest sense of respect and genuine reverence, she carefully places the glowing portrait of Princess Diana back into its rightful and honored position at the very center of the main living room wall at Windsor Lodge. The treasured diaries and remaining sacred keepsakes are organized with care, slowly restoring the warmth, character, and emotional soul that had once defined the historic residence. William stands quietly in front of his mother's portrait. Beneath the soft golden glow of freshly lit candles, Diana's familiar smile seems to bring warmth back into a room that had felt cold and lifeless for far too long. He gently squeezes Catherine's hand, sensing that genuine peace has finally returned to Windsor Lodge after years of tension and turmoil. They have achieved a powerful victory, reclaiming the family's core values and protecting the unblemished legacy left behind by those who came before them. And the message is impossible to miss. No amount of authority, wealth, or influence can justify using greed to violate the sacred dignity, history, and love at the heart of the House of Windsor. Honestly, the fact that this entire dramatic story allegedly came down to a secret financial ledger and a hidden surveillance camera is probably the most cinematic part of all. This wasn't simply a disagreement over furniture, decoration, or interior design. It was portrayed as something far bigger. An elaborate operation allegedly designed to rewrite the history of a royal residence while secretly redirecting enormous amounts of money. And the entire structure began to collapse the moment someone started following the financial trail and examining where every transaction actually went. But there's one major question that still remains unanswered. Was Camilla really acting alone? Or was there a much deeper network of people helping her operate behind the scenes? The mention of a mysterious 1997 secret letter as a possible unresolved loose end suggests that the struggle over Diana's legacy, the royal family's history, and control over the public narrative may be nowhere near finished. Camilla could potentially be only the visible tip of a much larger conspiracy operating within the royal establishment. And if William and Catherine really have gained access to this level of investigative authority, then what happened at Windsor Lodge may only be the beginning. Because if one hidden ledger and one concealed camera were enough to bring down an entire operation, there could be many more secrets waiting beneath the surface. And sooner or later, they may all come crashing into the light.